Right now I'm preparing the Dremel to do the bevel and the burnishing of this flap. Burnishing is a simple matter of using a tool that will literally burnish the edge. It kind of, through rapid repetition of that little tool, you can do it by hand or you can use a Dremel like I do. It literally burns the edge to strengthen and also to make it a little more smooth. And once that's done, then I lay down the first coat of Resin to get it prepared for the die and the lines. Once this is done, then I'll step right into doing the flag. So I'm preparing my workspace now, and it's a simple matter of I've already done one coat of Resin on it and let it dry. So I'm going to be darkening the compartments with orange on one side and green on the other. After those compartments are darkened on both sides, because you want that flap color to be continued on the back as well. Once those compartments are created, then the next thing would be to let it dry, and then I'll come back in, and this time I'm going to be using the Uniball Signo pen to create the lines, and then I'll use Q-tips to darken the edges. That's essentially the process I'm going to be working with. And as I've said before, what you do with a project, it really, or I should say any pattern that you come across, how you customize or make it your own is essentially what design's all about. There's no mystery to design. It's a simple matter of making something aesthetically functional. So I stand corrected. It's making something functional as well as aesthetically pleasing. That's what you hope for. Something that you like to look at. You know, it's inspirational. It can be it can inspire creativity. It can also be faith promoting. It can also do other things. So here we have, I'm actually darkening the lines with the Uniball Signo pen, using just a popsicle stick, something simple. And I'm going to be darkening right on the edge where the color comes to an end. In order to hide the sort of uneven dye line that's created where I brushed. And the Uniball Signo pen seems to hold up quite well to the Resin when you put it down. Better than most. Whatever its super ink is. I think the hybrid inks like that oftentimes have different components of ink that are soluble or insoluble on various solvents, and that way part of the ink might dissolve, but not all of it, and that's how they preserve whatever it is that the ink's supposed to preserve. I might be mistaken on that. It's hard to say. Ink manufacturers seem to be very careful about what they provide. Sorry, I got out of the frame there a little bit, but it's nothing new. I've done this before, where I basically take the item, I hold it, and slowly take a Q-tip and just darken the edge. I've seen people do this with in a lot of different ways. And I mean, it's really up to you what you want to do. This has already been beveled and burnished, so I'm not losing a step here. If you notice, I didn't do the lines on the bottom, and that was just an oversight on my part. Wasn't paying attention. Okay, here's the first coat of Resin on the top. The first coat is where you really have to be careful. You're trying to avoid pooling, and you're keeping an eye on any kind of dissolution from occurring. So if you see the black line, for instance, or the black along the edge start to dissolve and spread out into the pattern, that's the purpose of using a Q-tip to draw up a little bit. But I should say, the more of this that you pull up with a Q-tip, the more likely that a good solid coat of Resline is not going to be laid down. That's the tragedy or the difficulty of laying coats of Resline on things like this, is that trying to drop the Resline to keep from spreading. Actually, I stand corrected. I did do a line on the bottom. I just didn't show it. I must have missed that in a video. Trying to just basically prevent the dye and the ink from spreading. That's all we're doing here with the multiple coats of Resline. I wish I had a better process for this, but I don't. So this is the second coat that I'm doing right here on the top and the bottom. This flap has already been had the holes punched. It's got all of the coloring. I'm just trying to waterproof it with Resline, and then I'll literally let it dry and stitch it right into place. It's a lot easier to do this process when you're not dealing with the letters. The letters are probably the biggest challenge of the dyeing process that I've outlined, because that ink gets in there and it's hard to keep it from spreading. So this is actually the third coat of Resline. I think I did a total of 4 coats total. Sorry, I said that twice. I do that a lot lately. And I'm leaving a lot more on there, as you can see. I think the last coat I'm able to just put it on there and just let it sit. Not a big deal. Okay, this is the third coat on the bottom. I split up the videos this time rather than trying to spray both sides, because I was having leakage on the bottom from the dye and the colors into the paper towel. So here's the fourth coat, the final coat on this project. After this is done, once that dye and coloring everything is locked in, then I'll let it dry, punch in the holes for the buttons, install the buttons, and then install the flap literally in the same holes that I had before. So this is the last coat on the top. This is the fourth coat on the bottom right here. After this, the flap will be ready. It didn't require as many coats this time around, simply because I didn't have all the lettering that kept dissolving into the Resline over and over again to deal with. Because those little reservoirs created by the letters collect the ink, and the ink dissolves, and because there's too much ink. The amount of ink makes a difference. There you have it. So here's me drilling out the buttons, as I've shown before. I take a drill bit that is designed for this kind of thing. Trying not to drill through my hand, which is kind of a stupid thing to do. So I'm going to drill the buttons out of the other flap that I removed, and I'm literally going to use it as the pattern for the holes on the new flap. It's a simple matter of just laying it on top. When all's said and done, I'll take all these pieces and I will create what I call a revised pattern that you can download and have all of the pieces that you might want to create whatever version of this you'd want to do. So I've marked the holes for the buttons, pulling out my pieces. These are a little stainless steel. Get stainless steel if you absolutely must do buttons. Make sure they're stainless steel. If you don't, they'll start rusting out in a couple of years, particularly if you're in a humid environment. I mean, the first project I made, it didn't last 2 years, and everything was rusting. Okay, I've created the holes. I'm using a little bit of leather as a buffer so that it doesn't damage the button. and I'm just going to stamp the post in. It looks good. Got a bit of a cold today. Stamping the next one, and after this I'll be ready to stitch in place. There you go. That's what it's going to look like.